The first time I realized my husband truly hated me was 3 weeks after our wedding, when I heard him laughing softly on the phone in the hallway outside our bedroom. It was the kind of laugh a man gives someone he loves. Warm, gentle, intimate. And I knew that laugh was not meant for me. I stood frozen beside the bedroom door, my hand still resting on the light switch. His voice dropped lower, softer, the way people speak when they are afraid someone else might hear. "I miss you too," he said quietly. "This marriage means nothing, Vic. Just give me a little time." My chest tightened like someone had wrapped cold wire around my heart. This marriage means nothing. I slowly turned off the light and climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling of the penthouse that still didn't feel like home. I had been married to Dr. Alexander Sterling for exactly 23 days. And in those 23 days, he had barely spoken to me. But to understand how I ended up lying in a stranger's bed, listening to my husband whisper, "Love to another woman," you have to go back 6 months earlier, to the moment my entire life fell apart. 6 months ago, I was just Sophia Whitmore, a fourth-year medical student in Pittsburgh, drowning in textbooks and caffeine while preparing for my final exams. I had dreams back then. Big dreams. I wanted to become a pediatric cardiologist. I wanted to fix the tiny broken hearts of children. My family used to say medicine ran in our blood. For 4 generations, the Whitmore name meant innovation in cardiac medicine. My great-grandfather had founded Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, but my grandfather held patents that revolutionized heart treatments. But by the time I reached medical school, the fortune was gone. My father had destroyed everything with gambling. The company had been sold to pay debts. Our mansion in Shadyside was in foreclosure. My tuition barely survived on scholarships and part-time tutoring. Still, I kept going, because medicine was the one thing no one could take from me. Then, one afternoon, while I was studying in the library, my phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a police detective. "Miss Whitmore," he said gently, "your mother has suffered a massive heart attack. You need to come to Presbyterian Hospital immediately." The world stopped. By the time I reached the hospital, my mother was already in intensive care. Machines surrounded her bed. At the steady beep of monitors filled the room, Dr. Morrison, the cardiologist, spoke to me outside in the hallway. "The damage to her heart is severe," he said carefully. "Without surgery, she may only have weeks." Weeks. The word felt unreal. "How much will the surgery cost?" I asked. He hesitated. "Roughly $400,000, he said. "And that does not include recovery and long-term care." $400,000. I made $12 an hour tutoring pre-med students. I stood in the hospital hallway feeling completely helpless. That was when Marcus Sterling walked into my life. He appeared beside me like a man who already owned the building. Marcus Sterling was one of the most powerful figures in Pittsburgh's medical world. His hospital network dominated half the city. But he had known my grandfather years ago. "Sophia," he said warmly, "my dear child, I heard about your mother." I was too exhausted to question his sudden kindness. "I'll make sure she receives the best care available," he continued. "Money should never stand between a patient and survival." Relief flooded through me so fast it almost made me dizzy. But I didn't understand then that nothing in Marcus Sterling's world was free. 3 days later, he invited me to lunch at the Duquesne Club. The place was filled with polished wood, crystal glasses, and the kind of quiet wealth that made people whisper. Marcus sat across from me, his expensive watch glinting under the lights. "Sophia," he said calmly, "I believe we can help each other." My stomach tightened. "How?" I asked. My son needs a wife. I blinked. I'm sorry? My son. Dr. Alexander Sterling, a brilliant surgeon, 30 years old, very successful. He folded his hands. But certain business situations require him to appear settled. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. You want me to marry him? In exchange, Marcus said smoothly, your mother will receive the best medical care available, every bill covered. My chest felt tight. I don't even know him. You know his reputation, Marcus replied. He is respected, intelligent, successful. I swallowed hard and trapped. Because my mother's condition was getting worse every day. Marcus Sterling had made sure he was my only lifeline. 2 weeks later, I met the man I was about to marry. Dr. Alexander Sterling. He stood across from me in his father's office, tall and perfectly dressed in a black suit. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his gray eyes looked at me with cold indifference. He was painfully handsome and completely uninterested. Let's be clear, he said flatly, as we reviewed the prenuptial agreement. This is a business arrangement. My fingers tightened around the pen. I understand. I need a wife for social appearances, he continued. You need money for your mother's treatment. We both get what we want. His voice was calm, emotionless. We will have separate bedrooms, separate lives, public appearances only when necessary. I nodded slowly. No emotional complications. Those were his exact words, and I agreed, because my mother was dying. Our wedding took place 2 weeks later at St. Matthew's Cathedral. I walked down the aisle wearing my grandmother's old wedding dress, the lace slightly yellow with age. Yet the church was full of people who barely knew me. Doctors, politicians, wealthy donors. Alexander stood at the altar looking like a statue carved from ice. When he took my hand, his grip was polite and distant. No warmth, no love, just obligation. The reception ended late that evening. When we arrived at the penthouse overlooking downtown Pittsburgh, Alexander gave me a short tour like he was showing a guest around a hotel. Your room is down the hall, he said. Your room, not our room. The penthouse was enormous. Glass walls overlooking the city, marble floors, expensive art. But it felt empty, cold. As I set my suitcase on the bed, Alexander stopped at the door. One more thing, he said. I looked up. It's Dr. Sterling, he added. We're not friends. Then he walked away. And just like that, my marriage began. Just living with Dr. Alexander Sterling felt like sharing an apartment with a ghost. He left before sunrise every morning, the sound of the front door closing softly somewhere around 5:30. By the time I woke up, the penthouse was already silent again. And at night, he returned long after midnight. Sometimes I heard the elevator doors open. Sometimes I heard his footsteps moving quietly across the marble floor. But most nights I pretended to be asleep when he passed my bedroom door. It was easier that way. The strange part was that he was never rude to me directly. Alexander was always polite, always controlled. He spoke to me the same way he might speak to a colleague at the hospital. Good morning, Sophia. Good evening. There's a charity dinner Friday. Be ready at 7. Short sentences, professional tone, no emotion. Our marriage was exactly what he promised, a business arrangement. During the day, I spent most of my time at the hospital with my mother. Thanks to Marcus Sterling, she was recovering in a private cardiac suite that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital room. Her surgery had been successful. The first time I saw her sitting up in bed again, color returning to her face, I almost cried from relief. You look tired, sweetheart, my mother said gently during one visit. "I'm fine," I replied with a smile. "And Alexander? Is he treating you well?" I hesitated. Alexander never insulted me, never yelled, never argued. He simply ignored me. "He works a lot," I finally said. My mother nodded knowingly. "Doctors always do." But the hardest part of our arrangement came late at night. Because sometimes, when the penthouse was quiet and the city lights flickered outside the windows, I heard Alexander on the phone. His voice would change. The cold professionalism disappeared, replaced by something softer, warmer, more intimate. "I miss you too," he would say. Or sometimes he laughed quietly. That laugh again, the one that was never meant for me. The first major social event we attended together was the Sterling Medical Fundraising Gala. It happened about 6 weeks after our wedding. The ballroom was filled with Pittsburgh's wealthiest families, doctors, hospital board members, and politicians. Everyone dressed in elegant gowns and black tuxedos. Alexander's hand rested lightly on my waist as we entered the room. To everyone watching, we looked like the perfect couple. "Smile," he murmured quietly beside me. I did. Years of my grandfather's dinner parties had taught me how to survive events like this. I greeted donors politely. I spoke about medical research with board members. I laughed at the right moments. To them, I was Sophia Sterling, the beautiful new wife of Pittsburgh's most respected surgeon. Across the room, I noticed Alexander watching me during one conversation. His expression looked almost surprised. Later that evening, a wealthy donor named Patricia Mellon approached us. "Mrs. Sterling," she said warmly, "your grandmother used to host the most wonderful charity events." I smiled. "She spoke very fondly of you." Alexander remained quiet beside me, but I could feel his eyes studying me. For the first time since our wedding, he seemed curious, but the moment ended quickly. Alexander's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he glanced down at the screen, then leaned closer to me. "Emergency at the hospital," he said quietly. "I'll be back soon." I nodded. He walked quickly toward the exit. But 20 minutes later, when I stepped onto the hotel terrace to get some fresh air, I saw him standing in the shadows near the garden. His back was turned. His voice was low. "I know, Victoria," he said softly. My chest tightened. "I miss you too." The name echoed painfully in my mind. Victoria. So that was her name. I stood frozen behind the glass door, my heart beating painfully against my ribs. "I'll see you Tuesday," Alexander continued quietly. "I promise." I returned to the ballroom before he could see me, and for the rest of the evening, I smiled like nothing had happened. But something inside me had cracked. But the truth finally exploded 2 months later. It was a Tuesday night in October. Alexander had kissed my forehead before leaving for what he claimed was an emergency surgery. "Don't wait up," he said. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked into his study to return a medical journal he had left on the living room table. That was when I saw his phone. It was lying on the desk, and the screen lit up. A message appeared. "Tonight was incredible. I needed that after dealing with your fake marriage." My stomach dropped. Another message followed. "6 more months, and we can finally tell everyone the truth." My hands started shaking as I picked up the phone, then opened the message thread. There were hundreds of messages. Photos, hotel rooms, dates and times. Did every emergency surgery Alexander had mentioned suddenly made sense. Each picture felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. When Alexander returned home around midnight, he found me sitting in the living room. His phone was in my hands. His face turned pale the moment he saw me. "Sophia," he said quietly. I stood up slowly. "Emergency surgery?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" My voice shook with anger. Explain how you've been cheating on me every night. This marriage isn't real, he snapped suddenly. The words hit like a slap. You said that yourself. It's an arrangement. An arrangement that still deserves respect, I said sharply. I gave up everything for this marriage. I never asked you to sacrifice anything. Yes, you did, I shouted. Every time you treated me like I didn't exist. Alexander stared at me, frustration flashing across his face. At least I'm honest about what I want, he said coldly. The cruelty of the words stole the air from my lungs. Get out, I whispered. What? Get out. My voice cracked as the anger finally broke. Go to her. Go to Victoria. Alexander grabbed his car keys angrily. Fine, he muttered. At least with her, I don't have to pretend. The door slammed behind him. The sound echoed through the silent penthouse. I sank onto the couch, my entire body shaking. I didn't know then that within the next few hours, everything about our lives was about to change. Because somewhere on a dark Pittsburgh street, Alexander Sterling was driving too fast, and he was about to crash. At 3:17 in the morning, my phone rang. I woke up instantly, my heart racing as I reached for the screen beside my bed. Unknown number. For a moment, I almost ignored it, but something deep in my chest told me to answer. Hello? Mrs. Sterling? A man's voice said. Yes. This is Dr. Martinez from Presbyterian Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. The room spun. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. What kind of accident? I whispered. A car collision. He's currently in surgery. You should come immediately. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the anger and humiliation, fear crashed into me like a wave. Alexander might die, and suddenly, none of our arguments mattered. I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later. The emergency department was bright and chaotic. Nurses moved quickly through the halls, and monitors beeped constantly. Dr. Martinez met me outside the operating room. He had multiple fractures and internal bleeding, he explained carefully. We stabilized him, but the next 48 hours will be critical. My knees nearly gave out. Can I see him? Soon. We're transferring him to the ICU. Marcus Sterling arrived shortly after. For the first time since I had known him, the powerful businessman looked frightened. How is he? He asked urgently. They say he'll survive, I replied quietly, but there may be permanent damage. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. You don't have to stay here, he said gently. I know your marriage has been complicated. I glanced through the ICU window, where Alexander lay surrounded by machines and wires. Bruises covered his face. His hands were wrapped in bandages, and the arrogant surgeon who once controlled every room he entered now looked fragile and helpless. He's my husband, I said softly. I'm staying. For 3 days, I barely left the hospital. The nurses started bringing me coffee without asking. My mother was moved to a nearby room so I could visit her between updates. And on the 4th morning, Alexander finally opened his eyes. Sophia, he whispered weakly. I leaned forward immediately. I'm here. His gray eyes looked different somehow. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something raw, vulnerable. I remember the fight, he said slowly. You don't need to talk right now. Yes, I do. His hand tightened weakly around mine. Everything you said was true. I was cruel. I was selfish. Tears filled my eyes. Alexander, I don't deserve your forgiveness, he continued quietly, but I'm asking for it anyway. For a moment, I didn't see the cold surgeon who had humiliated me. I saw a frightened man who had nearly lost everything. Let's focus on getting you better, I whispered. Recovery was slow. Alexander's spine had been injured in the crash. His right hand suffered nerve damage that would take months of therapy to heal. For the first time in his life, the man who healed others needed help himself. And slowly, day by day, our relationship began to change. At first, it was small things. I helped him move from the wheelchair to the couch. I brought him coffee in the mornings. He started asking about my day. Real conversations replaced the cold silence that had filled the penthouse before. But one evening during his physical therapy exercises, he suddenly looked at me and asked quietly, "Why did you stay?" I paused. "After everything I did to you, why didn't you leave?" I thought about the answer for a long moment. "Because underneath all that arrogance," I said gently, "I saw someone who was hurting." Alexander looked down. "My mother died when I was 8, he said suddenly. I blinked. I watched her slowly die from cancer. I couldn't do anything to help. His voice trembled. I promised myself I would never care about someone enough to feel that helpless again. Suddenly, so many things about him made sense. The emotional distance, the cold walls around his heart. "You're not alone anymore," I said softly. For the first time since childhood, Alexander Sterling cried. 3 months later, when our penthouse felt completely different, the cold, empty space had slowly become a home. We cooked together. We watched movies together. We laughed. And somewhere along the way, something unexpected happened. We fell in love. I realized it one evening while helping him with his hand exercises. Alexander was watching me with an intensity that made my heart race. "What?" I asked nervously. "You're incredible," he said quietly. My breath caught. "Sophia, I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between us. Tears filled my eyes. "I've been falling in love with you too," I admitted softly. That night, for the first time since our wedding, we kissed. It was gentle at first, then deeper. Months of pain and longing poured into that moment, and finally, but we became husband and wife in every way that truly mattered. 6 months later, I stood in our bathroom staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. My hands trembled. "Alexander," I called. He appeared in the doorway a moment later, his hair still messy from sleep. "What's wrong?" I held up the test. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, he simply stared at me. Then his face lit up with pure joy. "We're having a baby?" he whispered. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I nodded. Alexander laughed out loud and lifted me into his arms, spinning me gently around the room. "I'm going to be a father," he said in disbelief. That was the moment I truly understood how much he had changed. The cold, distant man I married was gone. In his place stood a loving husband. And soon, a devoted father. Our daughter, Elena, was born the following winter. She had Alexander's dark hair and my eyes. Watching him hold her for the first time was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. The man who once feared loving anyone now loved our daughter with his whole heart. Years later, sometimes we still talk about the strange way our story began. An arranged marriage, a broken relationship, a terrible accident. But somehow, those painful moments brought us to the life we have today. A home filled with laughter, a daughter who runs through the halls of our once silent penthouse, and a love that neither of us ever expected. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories begin with the words, "I do," even when you don't mean them yet. Because sometimes love grows slowly, and sometimes it saves you when you least expect it.